Are you all ready for the automotive future? With environmentalists bearing down on government, who's bearing down on automotive manufacturers to produce vehicles that are easier on the environment, produce less emissions, all we're stuck with are buying vehicles that clearly are very expensive due to the research and development, government that aren't letting up, and even with the flip and flop and government swaps, and we can see what's going on in the US side of the border, what we see there is this really strong aggressive push and to squeeze the manufacturers to produce vehicles. By 2032, they're expecting 70% of the vehicles to be manufactured to be of the electric vehicle sort. Well, guess what? How about I be the 30% side? I'd rather hold on, kicking and screaming till the bitter end. Also, on the Canadian side of the market, we're having the same storyline. It seems like when the moons are aligned, things can just go upside down. And that's what we're having. And do you feel it's right? Do you honestly feel it's right when the government and the environmentalists take over and start influencing the car manufacturers? I mean, so much for freedom of speech, so much for freedom of choice. I mean, I don't think that electric vehicles are necessarily the worst thing. I don't think they're certainly the best thing. And I think it's a matter of choice. You want to wear a pair of red running shoes today, or you want a pair of white running shoes today? That's your choice, right? I mean, that's great. But if everybody told us we all had to wear red running shoes, it wouldn't feel so special, would it? And we'd also feel like somebody's got our thumb on our forehead. And there's just something not right about that. As a matter of fact, we're talking about EV sales. People are starting to catch on with what's going on. Obviously, what we're seeing is clearly Tesla is feeling the burn. Their sales have slumped. Now we've got BYD trying to knock on the door, and they're admitting that they're only making $1,500 or some odd dollars on the sale of each vehicle. And that's largely in part just they're trying to grab market share. And all of these other ICE vehicles, look at the Ford Mustang Mach-E. They had to incentivize that to the second coming of Christ just to make a sale. As well, the Ford Mustang or the F-150 Lightning isn't well received now. Initially, it took off. Everybody wanted to have one, but now the depreciation is absolutely demolishing those vehicles. And nobody wants to buy them new because they see on the used car market what they're worth. Nobody's buying them used because there's a limited lifespan on the batteries, and most of those are regular range. And everybody knows after Farley got behind the wheel of one of his own pickup trucks, the F-150 Lightning, that he can go half as far as he wanted to. So people are skeptics. They're just not interested in what the electric vehicle market has. Now, granted, I get it. There's those folks that just feel like they have to be part of that space. They have to buy the electric vehicle. I've heard people comment that once they bought their electric vehicle or their new Tesla, they looked at ICE as basically like horse and buggy, or it's like riding a giddy up again, or it's like taking us back to the early 19th century. And while there may be some truth to that, you know, the mechanics of an internal combustion engine are very barbaric at best. However, it's a marvel of engineering. It's like a Rolex watch. You could always build a watch that's probably arguably more digital, more accurate, and probably finer and cheaper. But that's not always the solution. Some people want a Rolex watch for its fine hand craftsmanship, its detail, attention to detail. You won't get that with most of these electric vehicles because most of them are appliances. And now we've already seen, unfortunately, a lot of people had high hopes for hydrogen. Well, what we're seeing there now is, California, one of the strongest advocate states for hydrogen fuel up stations, are starting to close their doors on that. Now, even Toyota basically gave away or giving away their vehicles that were hydrogen powered. The writing's on the wall. Its containment is not easy. Its available infrastructure is not easy. It's going to take a major overhaul and retrofit to even facilitate this transformation. So hydrogen doesn't seem to be the answer. So all of this push and efforts by environmentalists and, again, the government's putting their schnoz in there to try to push people into a corner that they don't want to be pushed. I mean, even vehicles that are currently internal combustion vehicles. I mean, I use the likes of, here's a great example, Mercedes-Benz, right? We all know and love Mercedes-Benz. Everybody appreciates Mercedes for, the built like a tank, built like a vault, have that robust V8, V12 drivetrains from many moons ago. All of that has changed. What do you think's happened to the latest C63S? Remember the outgoing that had that wonderful, glorious 4-liter V8 that produced, a significant amount of power, around 500 horse? Everybody loved that. And then guess what? They pulled the rug out from underneath, and they said, you know what? No, we're gonna follow the environmental train. Now, instead of that V8, we're gonna give you a 4-cylinder engine. We're gonna hybridize it. We're gonna boost the crap out of it, and now you're gonna have a vehicle that's a little better on the environment, and it's a 4-cylinder with a little hybrid. Sure, it's faster on paper and probably quicker in a straight line, but nobody wants it. It did not sell. As a matter of fact, all fingers point that Mercedes is elected to no longer sell that vehicle in North America. Sales are in the toilet. I've tried researching online, and I literally could not find cases of vehicles that were sold and VIN numbers that were sold here in North America. And granted, there might be the odd one here or there, but now people are like, you know, when BMW's putting out vehicles that are getting more aggressive, more fire breathing, they're not forgetting their true roots, at least not yet. They've even sort of scaled back and said, you know what, the i7s and the iX and all those vehicles are not selling that great either. Now, BMW had to do something to transition into that space. But even that, they're recognizing we can't forget our roots. We can't. And they haven't. You know, the M4s are better than ever. The M3s, the M4s, the M2s, they're all better, more fire breathing and better performers than they've ever been. And that's because they're going back to their roots. And they know the people that made the money in the first place, so the people that want that driving experience. Now, Mercedes, they're trying to deliver, you know, this idea of luxury, but there's just nothing luxurious about a buzzy 4-cylinder engine. It just does not feel luxurious. Not to mention what Mercedes is doing, in my personal opinion, because I currently own a late model Benz C-Class, everything feels like a superficial layer, like a skin, almost like you put a filter over top of what is real. And the reality is, a very, very cheaply put together vehicle with a Mercedes skin, bigger emblems to try to fool you, to make you believe that you're driving as something unique luxury vehicle. When in fact, unfortunately, they waved bye-bye to quality many moons ago. It's a sad state, but why is this happening? And it's not unique to Mercedes. We're seeing this in a lot of brands. I'm seeing this, unfortunately, in BMW too, even though the drivetrains are there. The way they put together some of their interiors, the fit and finish, isn't quite as robust. Buttons move around a little bit. Things aren't as tight as they used to be. You know, they're all taking a little bit of that money out of their bread and butter to put it over in development, research development on their electric vehicle space. And it's sad when the environmentalists have that much stroke, because this is what's actually happening. It's getting to a point where you and I can no longer get an internal combustion vehicle. I'd love a good old-fashioned reliable V8 engine for my pickup truck, and I'd like a fire-breathing twin-turbo V6 for my, sports car, and I'd like my supercar to have a naturally aspirated V12 engine. And on top of all of that, we all know what's important. That's a driving experience. And while I'm not here to argue that a new Tesla Model S Plaid will absolutely eat my F-Type R for lunch. I've had that comment before too. Absolutely it will. And there's certainly no denying that the performance is there in some of these vehicles. But it's like everything, nothing, you're literally an 8-hour sleep away from an overnight flash to your new Tesla with a firmware update that limits your speed to 90 kilometers per hour. Or potentially adjust the way that vehicle drives, or extends range forsaking the performance, or does any number of nannies, or tracks your time, or clocks you inside with their internal cameras. I mean, Big Brother's watching. I'm not here to be a conspiracy theorist. I'm strictly saying some people just want the choice. But unfortunately, with governments getting their hands on all of this influence and bearing down, governments, power, greed, taking back, given basically a second grade vehicle in my mind to what the consumers have. The consumers literally are getting little to no choice these days. And unfortunately, with that said, think about, I know a lot of you have already said this, and we've said this on video after video about, the GMs. Hey, at least they're sticking with their V8s. Ram, not great quality, but they've got some V8s. Ford, well, they've basically toggled out their twin-turbo V6s. All of these manufacturers still rock a pretty solid internal combustion engine. But now what we're starting to see, and I can say specifically on the Canadian side of the border, is now this implementation of taxation. You as a consumer, you, me, all of us are getting hosed. Because what's starting to happen is they're starting to apply not just, your standard GSTs, the goods and services taxes in Canada, or all these state taxes, provincial taxes, PSTs, harmonized sales taxes, all this other garbage, income tax. They're tax to death. Now what they're doing is applying a carbon tax, saying that our vehicles emit too much carbon. Well, you can debate whether that's a fact or not. I truly believe what I'm seeing on the Canadian side of the border, it's backed by zero science and entirely by cash flow to the government. So that's my personal opinion. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you have an input and the output is a response, and you're seeing a response and you're seeing an influential change, great. Yes, let's do that. But there's no science behind a lot of this. And so what you're getting now is increased taxation at the pump. And so you driving your 20-year-old Ram or your 20-year-old Chevy pickup truck, or even your late model pickup trucks, you're going to be priced out of the market. These current governments, the US, Canadian, and clearly in Europe, it's even more aggressive. They're controlling the market by influencing with heavy taxation. Taxation to the point where you won't want to drive your gas guzzler. It'll be too expensive. They're going to become passively aggressive in the way that they treat you, the consumer. They can't force you. They can't come down to your door and say, thou shalt. But they'll make it so cost prohibitive that we can't afford to drive our new trucks or our old trucks or even our V8 sports cars or any of our classic cars, or even for some of those, those Ford LTDs or, like some of those old classics that just keep going because they're a simple V8. They just chug along, low RPM, very basic transportation, but they work. Those will no longer be affordable to drive. You'll get further influence from the governments bearing down on these manufacturers to continue enhancing the electric vehicle development. And with that, they'll stop producing backorder parts. So you'll no longer be able to get parts. I expressed this on one of my recent videos that my Ram 2003, I'm going to keep that thing running as long as I can. The downside is I'm already starting to see that when I need a part, like an O2 sensor or some other part, it's never on the shelf. And a lot of the parts aren't even available. They've been discontinued. I've actually had that. I couldn't even get a factory block heater for my truck. That's bizarre. So they're already starting to obsolete some of these older ICE vehicles, and the parts are becoming truly obsolete. So this is all stemming from the very top, with the governments bearing down. And now with these new environmental rules that are set in place, that are being influenced, it feels like they're slacking off for the short term for the next 3 to 4 years. But then the hit is coming hard. So by 2032, they're talking, again, as they say further to that, much more push to have more of the vehicles to be electric vehicles. Now, by that time, taxation will probably be double. Fuel costs are likely to be probably 50%, maybe 100% more than what they are today. So could you imagine paying $10 a gallon? Could we Canadians imagine paying, $3, $4 a liter? Because that's kind of where we're shipping up. Right now on the West Coast in BC, people are paying $2.10, $2.20, $2.20, $2.25 a liter of gas. That's right. People are starting to feel the burn, and this is not ending anytime soon. Now we could say, well, this will change with the administration change. And fortunately on the US side, at least you can only incur so much damage with the limited run that each president can run. That's great. Unfortunately, there's too much inertia in place already. And so you've got to think about this from the manufacturer's perspective. What are the manufacturers and the OEMs doing? Well, they're not sitting by idle. They're not going to continue further developing their ICE when they know that all these pressures are coming down to develop and enhance electric vehicles. But they also don't want to go crazy with the EVs because a change in the administration could literally mean that, wait a minute, pump the brakes on that. But there's still all this environmental inertia to keep pushing forward. So, a lot of these manufacturers, these OEMs, are sort of in a position of, dancing around, dancing on eggshells. They don't really know which way to go. They're sort of continuing down this path, developing a little bit of both, but not going fully down the rabbit hole. And unfortunately, this is just the world we're in. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is so much, price fixing on taxes, price fixing on vehicles. People just can't afford it. And sadly, we're already in a place where probably only the top 5% can even afford to buy a new vehicle. It's only going to get worse. Carbon tax is applied to fuel, but also to vehicles. As carbon prices go up, transportation costs, supply chain costs increase, everything's going up. With all of those increases in costs, fewer and fewer and fewer people are going to be able to afford that new vehicle. And then tack the prices of gas on top of it, forget about it. Then on top of it, this EVs. The development of these EVs is costly. It's a whole new technology. And while Tesla's leading the charge, and a lot of these other OEMs are starting to figure it out and start to develop their own manufacture, their own vehicles, the fact remains is it's a very expensive technology. The batteries are pricey. The mining is pricey. Even alternative manufacturing options for new style of batteries and new battery technology may be looming in the future, but it's still going to be costly. The electric motors are pricey. Body panels are pricey. And just the R&D is pricey. So to buy an electric vehicle is going to be cost prohibitive for a good part of the population, at least here in North America and the developed nations. That's going to be a very painful time. And we're feeling the pain already. And trust me, in Canada, we are feeling the pain in a big way. The current administration or current agenda of this government is one in which to tax everybody into the grave. That's clearly what's going on. I'm not here to pick sides, but clearly the mandate is there to raise taxes, to raise the cost of living, and essentially to push people into a corner of buying EVs, building cost-effective, I'm not even sure, it's not cost-effective, environmentally effective housing, modular houses. They were showing already that they're trying to build these little cubicle homes for people because housing costs are so high. Everything is getting so expensive. The cost of living crisis is real, and that's all we need. Hit the consumer with a pile of new expensive electric vehicles. Internal combustion vehicles too are expensive, but at least they know what they know. And if there's a manufacturer that decides that they want to lead the charge and say, you know what, no, enough is enough. We're going to mass produce a low-cost, bare-bones car or truck with crank windows, a simple engine, naturally aspirated, minimal technology, a set of gauges, and we're going to mass produce that for $10,000, $15,000, and we're going to sell billions and zillions of them. That's what people are looking for. But until that time comes, the cost of influence or the cost of manufacturing is just on the rise. Cost of living is on the rise, and we don't need more technically advanced vehicles like Teslas for the top 1 percentiles who actually can afford them. Again, I believe that every vehicle has a place. I'm not against Teslas or EVs or ICEs. I believe everybody should have that choice and not be forced into that space. And herein goes the conversation. I really would like to hear everybody's thought about this debate. Where do you think we're headed? Because everything that I've heard is 35, they're turning off the lights, it's going to be full EV. At least that's what the regulators and the press is saying. I've talked to people behind the scenes, people actually in the power industry, people that run the transmission utilities, distribution utilities, because that's a space I know very, very intimately. And I have a big, strong network in that space. And I know people who know that the regulators are not approving any major infrastructure upgrades. And so without the upgrades, we know we can't sustain a grid if we're going to double down on the sales of EVs. We just don't have the charging capacity, the power consumption. And for those driving EVs today, nonsense, power is free. Power is not free. There will be a point where there's so much brownout, so much power draw in the system because everybody's charging becomes brownout and blackout. Because what happens is the power system has to say, oh, it's drawing too much, we're losing it, it drops. What it actually causes, dips in voltage, the frequency drops. Normally in North America, we're running at 60 hertz. I've personally seen this when you're drawing too much inductive load on the system. All of a sudden, you go from 60 hertz to 59.8 to 59.5. And at some point, the utility says, we can't sustain that, got to cut it loose, chop, and they open breakers and shed that load. Because that's the only way to keep the rest of the system going. And that's what's going to happen. We don't have the infrastructure, and we're going to see brownouts and blackouts. And the more as we expand on this without the infrastructure updates and upgrades, the more of these problems we're going to witness. So I haven't personally heard of any big upgrades, at least in my area, in my jurisdiction. And I've got to believe that that's a big thing going on around the globe. I'm hearing lots of stories with what the limitations and people driving, just getting an extra, 2% on their charge, pulling up to a charge station, and then finding 22 cars in front of them waiting for the same charge station. So this is not a naysayer thing. It can work. It definitely, EVs can work. Definitely hydrogen, we're finding big limitations. But unfortunately, pricing people out of the market is sadly going to work. People can't afford a truck. They can't afford a gas. They can't afford insurance because that's on the rise due to all the auto thefts that we're seeing. Think about Ontario, East Coast, New York, California, Seattle, Portland, Miami. I could go on. But these costs are becoming prohibitive for everybody. Every man, woman, and child in the Western world is feeling the burn. And by 32, I'll be on that 30% trying to maintain what I have left of my internal combustion vehicles. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this whole conversation. This could be a very interesting run of the next 10 years. Be really, really odd, really interesting. And do you believe that governments need to get in there, influence, lean on car manufacturers to create mandates, whether it's ICE or whether it's EVs or something in between? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please drop it in the line below. Thanks, everybody. Definitely want to check that video out as well. You want to find out what is going on with Ram, Jeep. They are truly leading the truck crisis. Not sure why. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you real soon. Bye-bye.